that position, is I'd ask if I can get some more angels, friends and family, as they say. If I can get some more of that, because I want to preserve my equity. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that, can I get, as they say, angel, or those in an angel group that actually understands what we're doing, really understands our sector and our business and its potential. The next phase is then you begin talking to VCs. And remember, as everyone tells you, VCs are particularly tough with economics, but the more attraction you have, the farther along you get, and also the better valuation you will have. My suggestion to you in any of those categories is that you find friendly investors. The way you do that is you begin to talk to people in the marketplace about your potential investors. I always ask that when I look at something and I see if an investor who's meeting with us, I ask, who have you invested in? What else have you done? Can I talk to them? It's important that you talk to the other companies, because you will quickly find out if they're a good long-term partner, because any of these levels of investors, it's a marriage, and it's a marriage for who knows how long. And you've got to make sure going in that they're the right people for the opportunity. And it also goes back to, just like a marriage, who really understands this business and where it can go. It's very important they get it, so they don't call you late at night and say, where's my money? Or when are we going to exit? Or when are we going to take it public? And they need to actually understand you and the business and where it is. And again, it's also about what sector is the business in, because again, there are different avenues, whether it's tech, whether it's an industrial innovation, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's renewables, et cetera, whether it's, some sort of, let's say, medical devices, whatever the case may be. There are different avenues for each one of those different sectors.
Thank you for a comprehensive answer. To the same subject of the early traction, something that we started speaking a little bit in the beginning, the question comes from Dmitry. So if you don't even have MVP, but it's a deep tech startup, there is a small prototype maybe, but not a solid MVP. Is this a red flag for the investor, or there are ways around this?
No, it's not necessarily a red flag. I mean, again, all of what we're all talking about for these startups are solutions to problems, and that's always got to be your mentality. So you have to ask yourself strategically, who can benefit from my respective solution? And so where I'm coming from with that is, let's say you have a product, you want to test it out. You want to find a strategic investor / partner, and I like to call them partners, early on, who see value in your product or your service. And I'll give you an example, as we were talking about before. I've done a lot of energy startups. So there was a gentleman who came up with a very simple valve, not particularly interesting or exciting, but a very simple valve that solved probably a $700 to $800 million problem in the United States. What he did was he said, look, this is a valve that actually solves methane release from pipelines. Why is that important? Well, basically, the United States regulates how much methane can be released from gas pipelines. And if you don't have that amount regulated, you can get fined, and fined significantly if you're an oil and gas company. So this very simple product could save all the oil and gas companies millions upon millions of dollars every single day. So the strategic partners who benefited from them were, quite frankly, oil and gas companies, as well as oil and gas investors. So the first thing we did was we tied him to NASA, actually, so they could do testing, because they like doing a lot of, as you probably know, they like doing a lot of testing and commercialization. And then two, we tied him to Chevron, which we all know Chevron is a big oil and gas company. And then thirdly, we tied him to an investment firm that looked for opportunities like this for their strategic LPs or their investors. And their investors are all of the oil and gas companies. So finding a strategic partner, whether it's, again, a company, a university, even an organization like a NASA, wherever you are, it's an equivalent, that sees value in the product and says, look, I'm going to support this because, quite frankly, if it makes it all the way down the line, it solves our problem. That actually is the ideal person along the way with that type of product and that type of situation. The same is true in tech as well. It may be a strategic investor more so than a strategic company, but finding a strategic partner who sees real value and is willing to cover some of the costs, whether it means the product rollout or it means the creation of a prototype, or the introduction to other investors. But again, a strategic partner, and that's really how you have to look at it, or partner slash investor. But it's a strategic play early on.
I like how you are building a comprehensive approach towards growth strategy and
Yep.
not just how to raise capital, but actually move your company forward.
Yep.
And to the point of finding a strategic partner, we had a question that came from our chat earlier. Um, our participants are asking, so when are you looking for the strategic partner? How do you structure the deal so you don't end up with a very little diluted equity by the end of your second or third round?
Great question.
Maybe some use cases or advice or life hacks.
So that's a very good question. My belief is up until a certain point, and again, I'm not going to tell you when. It's different for each company, so the data doesn't matter. But I think you want to use a simple convertible debenture structure early on for as long as you can to get to your Series A. That's it. At some point, it converts to a certain level of equity based on the next valuation round. That is probably the smartest way, so you can keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing this along, so you don't dilute yourself too much too early. That's what I would do. And in many instances, I mean, especially for products, this is a great strategy. Even for other startups, this is a great strategy. And also in the case of, for those of you doing real physical products and things like this, you realize that investors in industrial innovation and oil and gas, all those sorts of startups, it doesn't take a lot for the business to grow. All it takes is one contract or one major investment, and it skyrockets. You just need to edge it along so it gets to that point where it's ready for liftoff. And then that's when you get the real valuation and you think about dilution. But the convertible debenture approach is the best way. That's my
convertible debenture.
Yep. So effectively,
got it. Nice.
It simply converts at the next valuation to whatever is appropriate, or the appropriate valuation.
Right. So,
right.
I guess just a technical question on that. I'm sure you are familiar with the YC convertible notes agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advise to use that one, or do you think startup needs to go to a lawyer and create their own agreement?
I think you can use that, but I'll be honest with you. I'm a big believer in using a lawyer. I mean, or however you can, a friend, a colleague. We're all smart people here, but sometimes you've got to let the experts help you. For founders, we all too often try to do too much on our own. And what you don't want to do, especially with someone across the table who's very sophisticated, is you don't want to overly expose yourself or miss something. So my humble opinion is, I think you should get a lawyer to look at it and make sure that your interests are protected always. And that it could be as simple as, you've talked to Tian Wang and others. It could be asking someone who's part of an accelerator program, or whatever the case may be. There's groups like Techstars and Y Combinator, blah, 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 that have access to a lot of resources like that. But I absolutely think you should have someone look at it, especially if you're not a lawyer by training.
Right. I've noticed that this year there's been a little of a push from the investment community towards both convertible note and SAFE, and
Yep.
they're requiring more control through the first agreements.
Yep.
Do you see that trend happen? Okay, got it.
I
So
do.
how do startups respond to this?
Again, I think this is my view is the traction. That's you get as much traction as possible. I mean, I know a gentleman who didn't really raise any capital until year 2 or 3, and he bootstrapped it. This expression that for some reason in America we love using. They bootstrapped it as long as they could till he actually could get a high enough valuation and traction. Then he got the capital. It gave him a little bit of leverage, as you like to say, a lot of leverage. Most people would go out and ask for the money and then start. So you want to push the ball along down the field as far as you can. Then you can actually have a lot more leverage when it comes to the valuation of the company, when it comes to the structure of the deal, and so on. But again, when you're dealing with a very sophisticated VC, obviously they will push back. That's just how it is.
That's true. And I would say that's the moment where you want to have somebody, a third party, to help you
Right.
negotiate the deal and the terms. And it could be the lawyer, it could be investment banker, it could be advisor or mentor. Sometimes accelerators do this. So having that
Exactly. Exactly. To your point, I mean, for all of you folks out there who have your companies, I hope that you have what I'd like to call strategic advisors or mentors or whatever the case may be. It should not be underestimated how important it is to have people around you who can help guide you along. As a founder, it is a lonely experience at times, but having people around you who can say, hey, I don't necessarily know this, but I have a colleague, a friend from university, or whatever the case may be, a lawyer friend, a friend who knows this. It's important to have that group around you that keeps you moving forward and can advise you from time to time. Even if it's someone, you're a professor who happens to be a deep tech type of person who helped you get this off the ground, having those types of people who have some experience, they actually help a lot. That's part of the reason why we created Energy X, which if you talk to one of my colleagues, John Atkinson, that's part of his program. We created that. And that created a bunch of oil and gas executives who would help the startups get off the ground and make strategic introductions. But more importantly, to just simply have people they could talk to about deal structure, about market risk, about am I focused on the wrong market, and so on.
I can't agree more. That is so true. We have, I want to shift the conversation a little bit towards what are the industries that you see right now that are becoming more attractive to the investment and in general growing fast. But before
Yep.
we do that, I want to ask our participants, guys, write in the chat. We want to see which industry is your company right now, is
Yeah.
or your idea, doesn't matter. So we understand who are we speaking here today to. And healthcare,
Clean
retail,
telecom, ad
okay,
tech. Yep.
wearable,
Yep. Yep.
AI,
Yep. Hill tech,
clean energy. Oh, here you go.
ag tech.
Agriculture,
Yep. Yep.
nice.
IT, fintech, ed
Fintech.
tech, robotics.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very diverse crowd.
Hardware, photo detectors, which is industrial hardware, industrial innovation. Yep. Augmented reality, which also touches industrial. Yep. And other industries. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
VR health
Health
tech,
tech, entertainment.
same thing. Yep.
Nice, nice. Thank you so much, guys. So
So,
Hank, what would you say? Which industries this year got better spotlight?
well, I put in a big umbrella for these, but all of the big industry disruptors are the ones that have done really well this year. So you talk about EV, electric vehicles. That's really automotive. That's automotive / manufacturing. That's a big industry. Renewables. We had someone who said that. That is really energy. That's a big industry. Anyone who talked about anything that uses robotics or ag tech, disruptive for large industries. Because people, I'm on the industrial side, which is why I also run an industrial or manufacturing company. For the first time, I think, in a long time, tech people and big industry people have started to communicate and started to share and begin to think about implementing and applying real innovative technologies to transform big industry. So that includes manufacturing, energy, shipping, you name it. Robotics is playing a big part of that. IoT is playing a big part of that, et cetera. So those are the big ones for this year from my perspective. I mean, IT is always moving, but basically IT is the same theory, and it's an overriding theme of how do I make things work better and more efficiently. IT is always going to be in there because that's what it does, even for business intelligence software or any sort of analytics software, because IT actually connects the sensors for IoT. So IT, you guys are doing IT, you'll be great forever. But all of the big industries are the ones that I see are seeing the most disruption. Case in point, mobility.
Which one? Mm-hmm. Which industries do you see being at the bad position this year, and which ones you think might sink in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's interesting. Interesting. Which ones do I think? Huh, that's a great question. I actually don't think you're going to find a lot that don't do well, except for I think a lot of e-commerce platforms. They're not going to do as well. I think we've moved away from that. That's been combed through 1,000 times. So I don't think you'll find a lot of the traditional e-commerce. People are moving towards the big money, big things like this. The gentleman just said AI for building construction. Once again, industrial innovation. They're all, how do you change a big industry? How do you apply tech to big industry? If it's not tied to that, and even ed tech, same principle. Education, although people don't see it as an industry, it is. It is an enormous industry that touches every single one of us on the planet. So again, how does something change that? But anything that doesn't have a broader application beyond just X, meaning I provide a product, or as I like to say, I sell donuts online. Anything that's just very simple. Okay, but I now have a guy who wants to change all of construction and how we build every building using the software. It's very simple. And so I think things that are just simplistic and don't have a broader application, not just locally, but beyond there, not just nationally, but internationally, they just don't have the scalability, if you will. People are beginning to see that, and they're beginning to look at, they're going to start looking away from those sorts of things.
What would you say? Because you mentioned the construction
Mhm.
and heavier industries.
Yep.
Historically, they've been extremely slow to change and resistant to change. Um,
They're-
I don't want to sound negative, but
no,
you
no, no,
know.
no, 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 no. It's because I run a manufacturing company, so it's a very simple company, kind of boring, if I tell people what it is. But the reality is it's a phenomenal company that's been around, as a phenomenal history, and has done a great job. And what people don't understand about big industry is that, and tech people don't understand this until recently, and this is why all of you guys are doing what you do. For big industry, big changes, it's like a big battleship, right? Big changes that are dangerous. So if I all of a sudden dump a whole lot of money, into robotics, if I don't know what I'm doing, I could literally bankrupt the company tomorrow. And so that's why people in big industry were reluctant, and have always been reluctant to change things. I've been manufacturing cars this way for forever. If I change to this, it's going to have an enormous ramification for us. In fact, we're going to have to change our entire supply chain. For the first time, like I said before, tech and big industry are beginning to communicate the right way, where they begin to say, wait a minute, maybe applying robotics to these particular portions of our supply chain makes a lot of sense. In fact, this is exactly what happened to the automotive industry back in the 70s in the US. The Japanese had already used it, but in the 70s in the US, they really began to roll out robots. Well, beyond just automotive manufacturing, other sectors are beginning to think more broadly and deeply about how can different innovations affect us. And we've seen it before. Like I said, with automotive, we also saw it with deep sea oil and gas, which which robotics revolutionized how deep we could go in the water. It's all robotics now. It's not people. And it's been like that since probably the late 70s, 80s. Again, other industries, construction, transportation, shipping, oil and gas pipelines, all these other sectors are beginning to say, how do I do things more innovatively, do more with less resources? And tech is the solution. There's no way around it. And as well, the tech guys are beginning to, that guy who's selling robots is beginning to understand what it's like to actually manufacture. So he or she can come to the plant and offer value-added approaches versus you should just automate everything. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to strategically do what you're doing. So with that said, this is they call it Industry 4.0, if you will. This is a revolutionary time for all of those major industries. And I'd also say education's in there, agriculture's in there. There are all these industries that we never really thought about applying such innovations to. Robotics for ag tech, which many of the large farms are automated in some ways, or use robots or IoT or even satellite scanning, you name it. So these are, again, all these major sectors that are being transformed. Again, education's included in there.
This gives me chills, honestly. I'm imagining how the world could be if large corporations change the way they're doing their businesses through technology these days. Do you see much of a shift towards green technology, clean technology, impact? Is there a demand from the corporate side for
Yes,
this
there
type
is.
of innovation?
There absolutely is. I mean, there absolutely is. I mean, I think in the U.S., and I think this is true everywhere. So Europe is actually a great perhaps an amazing example in terms of EVs and renewables. So they're far ahead of the United States. But I think that adoption of making things cleaner, better, but also more efficient is going to happen, and that's going to move across the globe. Quite frankly, that is what's part of what's driven EVs. People doubted their receptivity and whether they'd be adapted. And we all remember that we're going back, say, 10 years when the idea of having electric vehicles seemed like it would never really happen. It'll be take too long and too expensive. Practically everyone I know now is thinking about getting an electric vehicle or expects their next car or the car after that to be an electric vehicle. So that was influenced by the focus on renewables and impact types of technologies, because that's exactly what it is. And the same approach will go into smart cities. Same approach will go into IoT for people who are in telecom or utilities. It's, how do we connect things, make things more efficient for our utility network, et cetera, and make it easier for our people to live. Go ahead.
How would you advise a startup founder from Russia or anywhere outside of the United States approach these big corporations?
Well, first of all, with caution and a confidentiality agreement, to be honest with you. Again, I would argue that I believe you guys actually need to think of yourselves as an external R&D for big corporations, because that's really what you are, right? You put the time, effort into developing a great idea, great concept that could easily be adopted or invested in by a major corporation. And everyone in, all of these major corporations, automotive, manufacturing, et cetera, is looking for things that, as we like to say, increase their shareholder value and allow them to monetize quickly. Your startups can do that. So my view is, obviously you approach them with caution, and you approach their innovation people, whoever they may be, or whatever access point you have, but always go in there with some protection for your IP. Please, 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 if you have IP, protect it. Always go in there with open eyes, but be very cautious about exposing too much too early without any protection. Because again, these are multi-billion-dollar corporations. I think they can be great partners, but you need to be smart as you would with any partnership. And there's
Thank you for that. And
there's a question here that I'm reading. Hank,
I was going to shift to that one. The question from Kirill, talking about scaling mistakes.
Yep.
For example, premature scaling, how to avoid, and what are the most common mistakes?
Yes, that started maybe becoming directed. Yep, that is exactly right. And this is a very good question, because we all know that Microsoft, Google, and many of these other big corporations effectively bought out their competition. So this is where the importance of knowing what's in the market, and I see that a lot in where I am, where someone will come up with a great tech or idea or even a software, but they don't know what else is out there in the marketplace. That's how this happens. I mean, you may be fine with saying, hey, they're going to pay me $400 million. And I'm going to come up with another product. You may be fine with that. I don't care. They can take it out of the market. But if you're not that person, it's important that you know what else is out there in the marketplace and what strategic moves they're making, and why you ask those questions. Why do you or do you not fit into their product offerings? Because usually in this situation, you don't fit into the product offerings. And you can actually deal with this ahead of time. But this is a market intelligence question. And again, I go back to why having advisors around you can help you get that market intelligence and understanding before you move forward with a particular strategic partner. But this is the negative side of what I was talking about, and it's incredibly important, actually, to not make this mistake if you don't want to be taken out of the market or restricted or enslaved, which is a better way to put it, because you would be if you're not careful.
Right. So there is actually on that point a very good question from Madina. She's asking, it's a common practice for big corporations to restrict selling to their competitors. Yep. So how can you go around it? Or maybe there are cases where this term makes sense.
So there's a company that I spoke to. There's actually it's an IoT VR product. I think the gentleman is out of Detroit, Michigan, here in the States. What he did was he actually white labeled his product. He said, look, I'm not going to restrict myself to anybody. I'm simply going to sell or license it to different people. And he created a business model that allowed him to do that. Now, granted, he's an executive who's been around for a while, very sophisticated, and so on. But that's another way around it. If you can possibly white label or license it to certain people and not restrict it, that's a way around this. But it all depends on who the partners are and so on. I like the idea though of the higher price. If they should pay a higher price to you if you can get it from them, if they're going to restrict it, because it's worth your time. And you also, if you're in that situation, do not let them restrict you, so that you can't do anything else for the next couple of years of your life, whatever.
And I also wanted to add that as far as I know and I see on the market, if you're entering the corporation through the CVC, corporate venture capital arm, versus the strategic investment arm or innovation lab, if
Yep.
it's a CVC, because the root of that is VC,
Correct.
they treat it more as an investment rather than a M&A.
That's exactly right. The CVCs, there are some that are very good who are out there. Obviously, we know the Googles. We know Alphabet. We obviously know the Microsofts, but there are other groups that are out there. Schlumberger, Chevron has one, Shell has one, BP has
Shell.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Actually, a close friend of mine is at the Shell in Houston. Yes, they look at it from a strategic portfolio as well as VC investment approach, right? A financial investment. But this is also, as we said earlier, about knowing who these investors are and what are their practices, and finding that out before you even go see them. It's very important, because you can avoid this by saying, or by finding out that, hey, these guys, they're looking for strategic investments that they can take out of the market and enhance their competition. Whereas this group, they're simply looking for investing in things that enhance their business and operations. So it's knowing the culture of who's investing is very, very important.
Let's talk a little bit about the mistakes of scaling to the international market. So if you tried entering US market and you failed in that market, would you advise to go and explore another market or regroup and come back to the US?
First of all, you should know the dynamics of any market. And I used to do some emerging markets work right after university. And I learned early on that all markets are effectively the same in terms of the levers that need to be pulled, right? They're all, the people, the market, the investment community, et cetera. They're different in different markets. So it's the same levers, but you got to know what the levers are and what's more important in different markets. So one, you need to demonstrate that you can scale the business somewhere successfully before you expand. And it's no different than buying companies, right? Make sure the base works and operates, and then you could build upon that going forward. The problem that many people have, and this is true of even bigger companies, they expand too quickly. Because they think I can get over here quickly and I've got a lot of money. It doesn't work like that, because there are variables you can't fix over there as quickly as you can fix down the street in downtown. And so first thing is knowing if you should go to the market, and also having a base operation that works really, really well. And then the next question you asked about, if we failed in one market, should we regroup? That's you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? I mean, what do you want? Because rebuilding in a market where you failed takes a lot of time and energy. And are there other markets that are more receptive? And I'm going to give you a great example. And anyone who's done renewables will know what I'm saying. There are certain products that it's too expensive to deploy them in, say, the United States or in certain parts of Europe. However, the same product can be successfully deployed very well in, say, Africa, or someplace that has more sun, lower cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I go back to those different levers, right? Which levers work in certain markets? There are many products that makes no sense. It's too expensive. The labor cost is too high. Product cost is too high. In the case of renewables is a great example. We don't have enough sunshine, quite frankly, to make this worthwhile. And we don't, and getting the tech there to convert the sunshine and the solar panels into energy for our photocells and so on it's too difficult in Germany. We're never going to make any money. However, there are markets where it does work, and it's knowing the dynamics of those other markets before you go into them. Because you're right, it may not work here, but it may work there. But you have to know those before you go. And that's, you got to know as much as you can up front. And there's something my mentor, who's guided my career, said to me, you want to always go into something stacking the odds in your favor. And I think that's just always remember that. Stack the odds in your favor before you go into another market. And that, or even having a strategic partner there, which mitigates the risk of going into a foreign market, which is something we're exploring separately.
We would like to hear your opinion. The question comes from Mila. I think it's very interesting. Do you have an expat has chances to succeed on a foreign market?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I'm from the United States. I mean, I certainly look. I believe smart people like smart people. That's what I've always believed my entire life. We like innovators. We like people who think outside the box. We like great people who make things better. That's how smart people are, right? So I absolutely do think so. I don't think being an expat is an issue necessarily. I think the key, and this is what I would tell you in business or in life, is surrounding yourself with people who want you to succeed if you go into a new market. So, for instance, if you want to do something in tech, you want to make sure you're in an environment that values you and your ideas, right? So you want to go to a community that values what you're trying to do. I don't think you should go to some place that looks at you like you're crazy for coming up with an IoT idea because no one knows what IoT is in that particular part of town. No, I think you need to find an environment that values you and your ideas and so on, and make sure you're in that kind of community wherever you go.
Where would you recommend starting the research towards international markets, and which one to choose?
I like to call them pods because for many years we thought that I'm a farm boy. I'm from Ohio, and well, not that all of Ohio is farmland, but everyone thought that Silicon Valley was the center of all things innovative. It is certainly the innovation capital for tech. There's no way around it for the United States. But there are numerous places throughout the United States and other places that have great, strong innovation communities. We know Tel Aviv, we know London does, we know Paris does, et cetera, Moscow as well, and so on. So it's finding a market where your product actually has the opportunity to thrive. I will give you an example. There's a city, one of my favorite cities in the United States for innovation is Birmingham, Alabama. Why? Birmingham has a strong manufacturing, a strong manufacturing community. Mercedes-Benz is based there. Hyundai has an operations there. I think Eurocopter is based there. And there's a strong support of all things around industrial innovation. In fact, the conference that I ran is based there for this reason. So if you said, hey, I'm an expat, but I have an idea for manufacturing tech or whatever the case may be, even ag tech, quite frankly, this is a market I should be looking at that's supportive, once again, of me and my ideas, concepts in tech. The other thing is looking at university communities, and this is the same, true also, I think, in Europe and other places, actually, even in Latin America, even in Africa, depending on what city or country you're in, and even in Asia, quite frankly, is places that have a strong connection between private and university tech. So there's a commercialization community within that particular city. Again, a place that may appreciate you and what you're trying to do.
Coming back to protecting your IP, when
Yes.
you're selecting to enter a new market, and we all know that patents are limited to a country and also limited in time. What would a strategy you recommend in terms of protecting yourself, protecting your IP?
Well, you can get the global patent, you can get the local patent, etc. There are other ways that you can do this. And again, let me start off with being very clear. You should have a patent attorney, and a very good one, always. And you get it pro bono, however you do it, you should have that. So forget about what I say. That's the person who should guide you. She should guide you through the process. But there are ways, in some instances, it's about the process and so on. And you may not want to patent everything because it's out there in the marketplace and someone can re-engineer it. There are strategies around that. So you need to think about which strategy you want to employ up front. And many of the companies I've talked to, they decided they didn't want to patent it because effectively there was a roadmap to build their product or design it, their processes or whatever the case may be, could be built. So they said, hey, I'm going to patent this portion, but not this portion, because without the two, you don't get the product. you can't figure it out. Or I'll patent the process, but not the actual device, and so on and so on and so on. There are strategies that you can employ. But again, in this instance, this is where you talk to a patent attorney, because this is it's a very serious issue.
And we had, by the way, guys, we had amazing talk from patent attorneys before this week and before that. So go back into history of webinars and rewatch that video. There is a lot of good advice for you.
Okay, good.
Towards the, so yeah, we're trying to cover everything for our participants.
Yeah,
Towards the emerging market questions.
Sure.
Since you have the expertise with them, let's say, such emerging markets as Nigeria, Africa in general.
Yep.
What are potential roadblocks and what are the benefits of going towards this type of market?
Okay, so it's interesting you bring up that. So my first job actually was out of college or university, was in Africa. It was based in South Africa, between the U.S. and South Africa, and we did private equity and VC in Africa. This is back during the Paleozoic era, many decades ago. But a couple things. I'm a big believer in high growth emerging markets. One, because there's something I remember reading years and years ago that said that the reason why at the time portions of Europe, Africa, Latin America, and Asia were going to grow and had so much opportunity is because for many countries like the US and other countries, we've always had, for instance, a stable rail system, right? Well, if I want to build a rail system in Africa now, I need to build one that's at the cutting edge of the cutting edge, because there's no reason to build an old rail system. And so with emerging markets, you are operating at the cutting edge of the cutting edge. And so that means, and the best example, and anyone who knows telecom, people were texting and doing fintech on their phones in Africa before many people did that in the United States. In fact, most people don't really do it as much to the extent that they do in other markets. No different than people texting in Asia, and so on and so on and so on. It was always at the cutting edge of the cutting edge. And that's what you find in places like Africa and so on. You have a high growth market and the opportunity to deploy certain technologies in those markets that will rapidly grow and be adopted. No different than cell phone towers and so things. That was all deployed. That's how you connected many parts of Africa very quickly, was the use of cell phone towers and so on. And so it's a tremendous opportunity. Now, it's entering the market. I think you need to enter the market doing your research. You have to have a good strategic or local partner to do it correctly. But do I think there's a lot of opportunity? Absolutely. I mean, I think there's
what are the roadblocks?
Again, the roadblocks are the right local partner. It's just no different than me moving to a different city in the United States. Local partners, size of the market, how do I go in? But I would say it's finding the right capital. I mean, I believe that you're going to have the opportunity to put capital there. What you find with Africa, from what I understand now, because I haven't been involved, the big sectors are education, obviously oil and gas, energy and energy tech is growing rapidly. Payment systems, fintech is growing rapidly.
Fintech. Mm-hmm.
Yep. In fact, I'm sure many of you know WPP, the global advertising firm, bought a division there, probably going back, I want to say 10 years ago, because of the anticipation of the growth of that market. So I think there is an opportunity, but knowing that having the right partners, having the right market intelligence about the market, I would actually begin to reach out to some of the VCs that are based there. And there are VCs who are there in Joburg, Cape Town, obviously Lagos and other markets, actually some obviously in Kenya and in Accra, Ghana, and so on. There are VCs who are actively investing, and there are opportunities, yes. And I also would argue there are also, for you folks doing big tech or agri-tech and so on, there are absolutely opportunities there. It's a longer play.
Question.
But yes.
It is. It picks up not as fast as on the developed markets.
Right.
For sure.
Right. Exactly. So you're not going to go public, within about a year. So not yet, but you have to understand, and that's another key part. You say the issues or roadblocks. It's understanding the dynamics of the market. One of the dynamics of the market is how long will it take for me to get to a liquidity event or something like that. It may go quickly because there's several payment systems. I read one last night where two gentlemen just got $200 million to expand in Nigeria, I believe. Well, they've been doing this for about a year and a half, but not everyone's going to have that experience.
Absolutely. And coming back to the cutting edge tech, the question is about VR. So there's a lot of conversation around VR. It was fancy, then it kind of disappeared. Now people saying that it's booming again.
Yep.
What's your take on this? Is this like the technology is old, like it's not really new. So what prevents its adoption?
Well, I think that again, people started to expand how it could be used, right? So now they're using it for training in industrial applications, in particular. Now they're using it for design and so on. And really, what happened is people had a sort of myopic view of how VR could be used, and that was it. And now people said, "Hey, look, I can train folks to work on an offshore oil rig, in my lab versus actually
Torbert does this.
Right, as opposed to sending them off to an offshore oil rig and having them, risk their lives learning how to do stuff that we don't want them to do until they know how. Right. The other thing, the other thing we have is you have a broader application of it quickly. So oil and gas, manufacturing, training, education, etc. That's what's really accelerated its growth. And again, I go back to big tech learning how to talk to big industry. This is another example of VR and its growth.
We have an interesting question from Mikhail. I feel like Africa caught a lot of attention from our founders. So it's a specific use case of them dealing with the multinational corporation in Africa and adding value with their technology to their core product, lenses supplies. And because it's not increasing the revenue of the main company, it's just adding value, they're not as motivated to promote sales of our startup, of product of our startup. So what would you recommend to boost sales if you are in a situation like that?
So repeat that again, because I mean, it's basically.
So there is a
it's
startup.
The margin, but it's not increasing sales. Is that what you're saying?
Right. From what I understood, so they're adding value, but they're not really increasing the revenue of the main of their partner company. Mm-hmm. That's why they're not as motivated to sell specifically their product. So it's a partnership, but it's not really driving sales, as far as I'm understanding.
That's what I understand. It's like managing expenses versus increasing revenue, right? If it were me and I had a partner, and again, this is just a theory, I would test the correlation between the two in terms of how do you monetize that adding value, whatever it may be, because there's a correlation between that and driving sales. And there may not be, but I'm saying if there is, can you present to them that, hey, if we drive revenue, this is how much more value gets created over time, right? That ultimately, at the bottom line, as this formula increases, there's more that drops to the bottom line. That's what I would do in terms of the correlation. But that's truthfully, we can talk about it offline if I have more details.
Yeah, I think it's a great entry answer, and obviously you need to see deeper into details and the numbers and the structure of the agreement with the partner and the startup. I would like to see what you guys responded to our questionnaire. We also saw some responses in the chat, so if we can see the results, would be fantastic. And they're coming up on the screen right now. Okay, so what are the benefits for the startup going international? Number one response got 35%. It's an additional revenue source. Second place went towards new resources, 26%. Third place is opportunities for diversification. And only 9 and 4% went towards access to a new seasoned professionals, human capital, and protection from volatility of the market. How would you comment this? Do you agree, disagree?
I agree with this layup. I do, especially number one. I do. I mean, from my
So
standpoint,
what about, mhm.
my standpoint is, and this ties to the expansion idea, finding teams, because that's really what, as a professional, my expertise is really finding teams. So I put a high valuation on that. That's just me, because I'm a big believer in that, and I believe when anyone invests, they're investing in the team. So that's why I put, to me, it's the biggest, most important.
Also, we had own question, own answer from Dmitry. He
Mhm.
says that taking your company international, it's also a need for the founder to increase the quality of their product in
That's
order to compete.
and that's what I mean by having the core business itself, including product or service. It has to be right, and it has to be correct before you expand it, because all the little problems will be exposed when you expand it, or quite frankly, stretch the limitations of your company if it's not in order.
Do you think there are use cases where you can release a product to an international market that would have a lower quality on the international market versus your internal initial market?
Again, there are examples. You can have situations whereby, look, we have an item where we don't need to add all of the bells and whistles, as we like to say, to the product, because we know that we'll do very well without those in this particular market. So absolutely.
Another interesting answer came from Mila. She says that she thinks about corporations as about governments. So basically, when you're going international, you're creating a larger government and trying to acquire more consumers, more citizens towards your corporation. Um, I guess I would like to hear your comment on that in terms of how do you align cultures if you have international base of consumers
Mhm.
there's very different from your initial base. How
Mhm.
can you manage all this consumer base?
Well, you could. I think that's the importance of having local partners and, local presenters, if you will, for each market. Because you're right. I mean, it's why, for instance, they'll change the name of a product for consumer products in a different country. So it's also having local experts who know your market and know how to take it there the right way, so you don't trip up. The example that people gave us when I was younger is the example of a company, Chevrolet, the U.S. company. When they went to Spain, they had a car and they called it the Chevy Nova, which in English, it means no go, right? And so the Chevy no go. So imagine looking at that at a car dealership and realizing that it's called no go if you're in Spain.
No, no.
That's what it's no problem selling that in the United States. But the problem is, in their case, they didn't have that person, whoever it was, who said, look, for this market, this is how we enter it. This is what we need to do. And that's very important.
I know we have just 2 minutes left, and I would like to finish this amazing talk. First of all, saying thank you to you because it's amazing how deep you can go on any question and just the broadness of them. To finalize this and give some inspiration to our startup founders, what do you think drives innovation?
Necessity, quite frankly. Necessity and open-mindedness, quite frankly. And I go back to, this is just because of my own individual experience, because in the last probably 10, 15 years, tech and big industry, the big industry finally realized we really can't grow, and we have a lot of competitive forces coming in. So we've got to adopt new ideas, new change, new innovations. And now you have things like many of the innovators you have on your side, some of the innovations in ag tech, IoT, robotics, and so on. That's it. That's where we are now.
Is there any way for our participants to follow you, to maybe ask you questions afterwards?
Sure. Just look for me on LinkedIn. However I can be helpful. If I know anybody, I understand the journey of a founder and an entrepreneur completely. I know it can be lonely and tough at times, but you stick to it. And most importantly, surround yourself by good people or with good people who are supportive of you and your journey.
Thank you so much, Hank. It was such a pleasure having you here.
It's a tremendous honor. And thank you for considering me to speak.
Thank you. I'm sure our participants will hack the LinkedIn and try to follow you there because it's not working in Russia.
It's all right. All the best, guys, and the world is open to you.
VPN. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Hank.
day. Bye.
Hey, Ian.
Hi, Hank. How are you?
Good.
Bye.
I'll see you later this
Hi,
week.
Tien.
I got the memo on the black shirt, so thank you.
Following the code, right? Tien, thank you so much for joining. I will just make a couple announcements and we will jump right into this. Ребята, спасибо вам большое за ваши вопросы. Не могу задавать все вопросы, поэтому выбираю самые актуальные для всех. Если вы видите, что ваши вопросы не задаются,